Natalie Rowan knew something was wrong before she even set her keys on the marble counter. The house was too warm, not cozy, not welcoming. Warm in that strange, airless way a room feels when someone has been breathing secrets into it. She had come home early from Midtown after a luxury client canceled a final event walkthrough. Her black heels ached, her phone battery was nearly dead, and a paper bag from Whole Foods hung from her wrist with a bottle of sparkling water, rosemary chicken, and a lemon tart Damien used to love. On the drive back through Manhattan, she had told herself maybe tonight could feel normal again. Then she stepped inside. A champagne-colored scarf was draped over the arm of the living room sofa. Sienna's scarf. Natalie had seen her wear it at brunch near Fifth Avenue 2 Sundays ago. Next to it sat a half-empty wine glass, a lipstick mark pressed into the rim like a signature. Her stomach tightened. "Damien," she called, but the house answered with silence. Then came the sound, a soft laugh, low, intimate, floating down the hallway from the master bathroom. Natalie did not run. That was the strangest part. Later, she would think shock had turned her bones to glass. She walked slowly past the family photos, past the framed vacation picture from the Hamptons, past the candle she herself had lit the night before, now burned halfway down, like time had skipped ahead without asking her. The bathroom door was not fully closed. Steam spilled through the crack. Natalie pushed it open with 2 fingers. And there they were. Damien, her husband of 16 years, half submerged in her white soaking tub. Sienna Vale, her best friend, for more than a decade, leaning against his chest as if she had belonged there all along. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then Sienna gasped. Damien stood too fast, water sloshing over the edge. But Natalie's eyes did not go to their faces. They went to the small velvet ring box resting beside her folded bath towel. Open. Empty. And in that instant, Natalie understood this was not an affair born from weakness. It was a plan to erase her. 8 months before Natalie opened that bathroom door, her life still looked beautiful from the outside. If you had seen her that spring, stepping out of a black town car on Park Avenue with a leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm, you would have thought she had everything under control. At 42, Natalie Rowan had the kind of quiet elegance people trusted. She was not flashy. She was polished. The kind of woman who remembered everyone's dietary restrictions, sent thank-you notes by hand, and could calm a room full of wealthy clients with one gentle smile. Her husband, Damien Rowan, looked perfect beside her. He knew how to enter a restaurant and make people turn their heads without seeming to ask for attention. He wore tailored navy suits, a silver watch, and that same easy confidence that had once made Natalie feel safe. At charity dinners, people still called them one of those couples. Solid, refined, untouchable. But the truth had already begun to shift. It started in small ways, so small that Natalie felt embarrassed even noticing. Damien began taking phone calls on the balcony instead of in the kitchen. He changed the password on his iPhone after years of using the same one. He started coming home later from client dinners, carrying the faint scent of cologne layered over hotel soap. When Natalie asked if everything was all right, he would kiss her forehead and say, "You worry too much." That answer worked on her more than it should have. Natalie was tired that season. Her father had died the previous year, and grief still came in strange, private waves. Some nights, she woke at 3 in the morning and stared at the ceiling, her heart racing for no clear reason. Damien knew that. He knew she hated conflict, hated seeming unstable, hated giving anyone a reason to pity her. So he used softness instead of cruelty. If she asked why he missed dinner, he smiled and called her sensitive. If she asked why he seemed distant, he blamed stress. If she reached for him in bed, he turned gently and said he had an early meeting. Nothing dramatic. Nothing she could prove. Just enough to make her doubt her own instincts. The worst part was that Sienna had noticed it too. One afternoon over coffee near Fifth Avenue, Sienna reached across the table and squeezed Natalie's hand. "Men get weird when women become too emotionally dependent," she said carefully. "Just don't push him too hard." Natalie nodded, ashamed. She did not know then that the woman comforting her had already begun stepping into her place. At first, Sienna Vale did not look like a threat. That was what made her dangerous. She never arrived like a woman trying to take something. She arrived with pastries from a bakery on Madison Avenue, a soft cashmere coat, and the kind of warm, knowing smile that made people confess things they had never planned to say out loud. She had been in Natalie's life for 11 years, long enough to know where the extra coffee filters were, which cabinet held the good wine glasses, and how Natalie liked the throw pillows arranged on the sofa. She moved through the Rowan townhouse like someone who had been invited into its private language, and Natalie had invited her. After her father died, Sienna became even more present. She came by after work with takeout. She texted late at night to check whether Natalie had slept. She listened without interrupting when Natalie admitted she no longer knew how to reach Damien. Sometimes she would sit at the kitchen island, wrapped around a mug of herbal tea, and say the exact right thing in the exact right tone. "You've been carrying this marriage by yourself for a long time. You need rest, Nat. Maybe stop trying so hard for a man who enjoys being chased." The words sounded like comfort. Now they would have sounded like strategy. There were small moments Natalie dismissed because love and trust make smart women explain away what should alarm them. Sienna knew Damien's schedule too well. She knew when he had investor dinners, when he had canceled a golf lunch, when he was supposedly flying to Boston. Once, Natalie mentioned that Damien had been distant for weeks, and Sienna answered too quickly. "He's probably just overwhelmed." Probably, as if she already knew the script. Another time, Sienna let herself in through the side entrance while Natalie was upstairs changing. She called out, "It's just me," with a brightness that felt normal at the time. Later, Natalie would remember how strange it was that Sienna no longer rang the bell. She simply entered. Then there was the closet. One afternoon, Natalie came downstairs and found Sienna standing in the master bedroom doorway, staring at the built-in shelves where Natalie kept her evening dresses. Sienna smiled and said she was admiring the tailoring on a black silk gown. But her gaze lingered too long, not like a friend appreciating beauty, but like a woman measuring a space. Natalie laughed it off. She did not know that by then, Sienna already had the code to the alarm, the rhythm of the house, and something far more dangerous than access. She had Damien's confidence. By early summer, Natalie no longer measured her marriage by love. She measured it by absences. How many dinners Damien missed in a week, how often he checked his phone during breakfast, how many times he touched her shoulder without really touching her at all. From the outside, nothing had shattered. That was the cruel genius of it. There were no broken lamps, no shouted accusations, no lipstick stains on collars. Their life still moved with the clean rhythm of success. The townhouse was spotless. Their invitations still arrived. Their names still appeared together on donor lists, gala seating charts, and holiday cards stacked neatly on the entry table. But inside the marriage, something essential had gone cold. So Damien had become a man who could kiss Natalie on the forehead and make her feel lonelier than silence. He started using business language for everything. If she asked whether he would be home for dinner, he said, "I'll keep you posted." If she asked whether they could spend a weekend away together, he said, "My schedule's tight this month." Even his apologies sounded outsourced, polished until no emotion remained. One Friday night, Natalie reserved a table at the River Cafe, hoping the view of the Brooklyn Bridge might soften whatever distance had opened between them. She wore the blue dress Damien once said made her look unforgettable. He arrived 28 minutes late, glanced at the menu, and spent most of dinner answering messages on his iPhone under the table. "Is something wrong?" she asked quietly when dessert came, and he had barely looked at her. He leaned back, folded his napkin, and gave her that patient expression she had started to hate. "Nat, not everything is a crisis." The words were gentle. That made them worse, because Natalie immediately felt childish for asking. After that, she began apologizing before she even spoke. "Sorry to bother you. Sorry, I know you're tired. Sorry, maybe I'm overthinking." Each apology made Damien calmer, more relaxed, as if her self-doubt was the exact atmosphere he needed. At night, the bed became another kind of evidence. He no longer reached for her. When she moved closer, he stayed still, claiming exhaustion, early meetings, stress. Once, half awake in the dark, Natalie heard his phone light up on the nightstand. Damien grabbed it so fast it almost fell. He turned the screen away. And for the first time, Natalie did not feel confused. She felt the quiet, rising terror of a woman beginning to realize that neglect was not the problem. It was preparation. The most dangerous trap Damien ever set for Natalie did not come with shouting, threats, or even lies she could easily recognize. It came with a pen. 3 months before Natalie found him in the bathtub, her father's condition had taken a sudden turn. The hospital room in Manhattan was always too cold, the air sharp with disinfectant and machine noise. Natalie spent her days there, sleeping in a chair, answering work emails from her MacBook, and pretending she still had enough strength left to hold her world together. That was when Damien became attentive again. He brought coffee. He rubbed the back of her neck. He told nurses she had not been taking care of herself. To everyone watching, he looked like a devoted husband, carrying his wife through the worst season of her life. Natalie wanted to believe that version of him so badly. She never asked why his kindness always arrived when she was too exhausted to think clearly. One evening, just after her father had been moved back from a procedure, Damien sat beside her with a leather folder on his knee. "It's nothing dramatic," he said softly. "Just some restructuring paperwork, tax planning, asset protection, estate insulation. With everything happening, I figured I should simplify a few things for us." Natalie barely looked at the pages. The words blurred together. Trust adjustment, liability shield, temporary transfer authority. It sounded technical, boring, safe. Damien pointed exactly where she needed to sign, his voice calm and practical, as if he were helping her avoid a future inconvenience. "You don't need one more thing on your plate," he said. Natalie signed. She signed because her father was sleeping behind a curtain, because she had not slept more than 4 hours in days, because grief makes paperwork feel less important than breathing. She signed because this was her husband, the man who had once held her face in both hands and promised that whatever happened in life, they would never stop being on the same side. Later, after her father died, she remembered almost nothing about those documents. Only the pen. A heavy black Mont Blanc Damien had given himself for closing a deal, placed carefully into her hand, as if he were honoring her, and not cornering her. Months later, when Elise Mercer would finally examine those signatures, her face would go still in a way that made Natalie's blood turn cold. Because the papers Natalie had signed while grieving did not protect her marriage. They quietly made it easier for Damien to remove her from the life she had helped build. Natalie did not scream when she stepped back from the bathroom door. That was the first thing she would later remember with perfect clarity. Not the steam, not the water running down the side of the tub, not even Sienna's startled face. It was the silence inside her. A silence so complete, it felt like her whole body had gone numb to keep from breaking apart too quickly. She closed the door. Not hard. Not dramatically. just enough to shut them back inside the scene they had created. Then she walked down the hallway, one hand trailing along the wall, as if the house itself had suddenly tilted. The framed family photographs blurred beside her. The beach trip in the Hamptons, Christmas in Vermont, a black and white portrait from their 10th anniversary party. All of it looked fake now, like props from a life that had been performed for her long before she understood she was the last one still believing it. In the kitchen, she set the Whole Foods bag on the marble island and stared at it. The rosemary chicken was still warm. The lemon tart sat tilted in its box. A bottle of sparkling water rolled lightly against a container of berries, making the smallest sound in the quiet. Natalie looked at those ordinary groceries and felt something inside her crack wider. She had come home thinking she could save the mood of the evening with dinner. Meanwhile, her husband had been upstairs soaking in betrayal like it was comfort. Then she saw the second wine glass. It stood near the sink, half full, the lipstick stain still fresh on the rim. Beside it rested Sienna's champagne-colored scarf, tossed carelessly over the back of a chair as if she already belonged there. Natalie stared at that scarf for a long time, and suddenly every recent memory shifted under new light. The late-night advice, the surprise visits, the knowing expressions. Sienna had not been comforting her. She had been studying the space she planned to enter. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Damien was moving. Natalie reached for her phone, but not to call him, not to cry, not to beg for an explanation that would only insult her intelligence. Her hand trembled only once before she steadied it and scrolled to a name she had not called in over a year. Elise Mercer. When Elise answered, Natalie spoke in a voice so calm it frightened even her. "I need you to tell me," she said, staring up at the ceiling, "how to destroy a lie without destroying myself." Elise Mercer arrived 43 minutes later, wearing a camel coat, dark slacks, and the expression of a woman who had long ago stopped being surprised by what people did behind closed doors. Natalie was still in the kitchen when she came in. Upstairs, the house had gone quiet again. Damien had retreated to his office. Sienna had slipped out through the side entrance 10 minutes earlier, after leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the kind of silence that felt dirtier than shouting. Elise took one look at Natalie's face and did not ask whether she was sure. She set her tote bag on the counter, pulled out a slim laptop, and said, "Start from the beginning. Not the emotions, the facts." That was why Natalie had called her. Elise had once worked internal investigations for a financial firm before becoming an independent forensic accountant. She was not cruel, but she had no patience for confusion dressed up as hope. While most people reached for comfort first, Elise reached for sequence, access, signatures, timing. Natalie told her everything. The bathroom, Sienna, the ring box beside the towel, the late nights, the changed phone password, the papers Damien had asked her to sign at the hospital when her father was dying. That was the first moment Elise looked up sharply. "What papers?" Natalie tried to explain. "Tax restructuring, asset protection, temporary transfer authority." She could still hear Damien's calm voice in the hospital room, still remember how numb she had been when he handed her the Mont Blanc pen. Elise's face changed, not dramatically, just enough to drain the last bit of warmth from the room. "Do you have copies?" "I don't know." "Then we get them." Natalie folded her arms tightly across her chest. "You think this is bigger than the affair?" Elise gave a short, humorless breath. "I think the affair matters, because it tells us who he is. But men like Damien don't usually risk their image for passion alone, not when they're this careful." She opened her laptop and began listing dates, accounts, properties, events. As she worked, the outline of something uglier started taking shape. Damien's distance had timing. Sienna's visits had purpose. Even the emotional softening at the hospital now looked less like concern and more like opportunity. Natalie felt sick all over again. Elise finally turned the screen toward her, a grid of names and arrows beginning to connect. "They weren't just betraying you," she said quietly. "They were making room for your replacement." And for the first time that night, Natalie understood the terrifying truth. She was not standing in the wreckage of a marriage. She was standing in the first room of a takeover. Gabriel Shaw did not arrive like a savior. He arrived like a man who had spent years watching powerful people destroy lives with polished language and signed documents. Elise called him the next morning. By then, Natalie had not slept. Dawn had spread a pale gray light across the townhouse windows, exposing every detail she wished she could unsee. Damien had stayed in the guest room. He had tried knocking twice, using that low, reasonable tone he always used when he wanted to sound like the calm one. "Natalie, we need to talk." She never opened the door. Gabriel met them at a quiet office suite near Bryant Park just after 9. He was taller than Natalie remembered, dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie, his expression steady in a way that made the room feel immediately more contained. She had met him once years earlier at the hospital, when he came to visit her older brother after surgery. Back then, he had been kind, without asking questions. Now, he looked at her with the same quiet recognition, but his focus shifted quickly to the facts. Elise handed him her notes. Gabriel read in silence. The affair, the papers from the hospital, the shifts in access, the likely asset transfers, Sienna's increasing presence in the home, Damien's careful emotional distancing. When he finished, he set the file down and folded his hands. "This is no longer a marriage crisis," he said. "It's a strategy problem." Natalie stared at him. He went on in the same even tone. "From this point forward, every emotional reaction you have can be used to support a narrative against you. If he's already laid financial groundwork, and then there's a strong chance he's also prepared a character argument." "What kind of argument?" Natalie asked. Gabriel held her gaze. "That you're unstable, grieving, exhausted, difficult. That the marriage became unlivable because of your emotional condition, not his conduct." The words hit harder than the affair, because they sounded possible, because Damien knew exactly where she was weakest. Natalie pressed her fingers together in her lap. "So what do I do?" Gabriel did not answer immediately. He opened a legal pad, wrote 3 lines, and turned it toward her. "Do not confront. Do not sign. Do not leave the house without advice." Then he added a 4th. "Make him believe you still don't understand the full picture." Natalie looked down at the words, then back at Gabriel. For the first time since opening that bathroom door, she felt something other than pain. She felt direction. And upstairs in her own house, Damien was already smiling like a man who believed he was still controlling the story. Damien waited until that evening to make his move. Natalie heard him before she saw him, the measured sound of his shoes crossing the foyer, the pause outside the kitchen, the careful breath of a man arranging his face before entering a room. By then, she had already spoken twice with Elise, once with Gabriel, and had spent the day learning how much damage a calm voice could hide. He stepped in carrying white roses. For one strange second, the sight almost made her laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly Damien. He had betrayed her in her own home, in her own bathtub, and with the woman who had called herself family. And now he stood before her with flowers that looked chosen by someone who still believed elegance could wash blood from the floor. "Natalie," he said softly, placing them on the counter. "We need to handle this like adults." There it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Not, "I destroyed us." Handle this. She stayed seated at the far end of the marble island, one hand wrapped around a glass of water. "You mean quietly?" His expression tightened, but only for an instant. Then the polished concern returned. "I mean with dignity," he said. "What happened was a mistake, a terrible one. I'm not denying that. But dragging this into public view would hurt everyone." Everyone. Another elegant lie. Natalie looked at him carefully. "How long?" Damien lowered his eyes, as if the question pained him. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." He exhaled and leaned both palms against the counter. "What matters now is protecting what's left. Our reputation. The house. Lily. Your peace. I can make this easier for you if you let me." That sentence told her everything. "Not if we work through this. If you let me." As though he were offering mercy instead of management. "What does easier look like?" Natalie asked. "A private settlement. Generous support. Time to transition. No ugly filings. No accusations. No spectacle." His voice turned gentler still. "At this stage in life, starting over can be hard. I don't want to see you struggle." The cruelty was so smooth, it almost passed for concern. Natalie felt her pulse rise, but Gabriel's warning held her steady. Every reaction was evidence, so every wound could be rewritten as instability. So she lowered her gaze and let silence stretch. Damien mistook it for weakness, and as he began outlining the quiet, tidy future he had planned for her, Natalie realized he still believed the affair was the only thing she had discovered. 2 days after the bathroom scene, the house settled into a silence so strained it felt staged. Damien moved carefully through it, speaking in measured tones, never raising his voice, never showing panic. That unnerved Natalie more than anger would have. He was acting like a man preserving evidence for a future version of events, one where he would look patient, thoughtful, and unfairly burdened by a wife who could not regulate her emotions. Natalie said little. She followed Gabriel's instructions, stayed inside the lines, and watched. That afternoon, Lily came home from school earlier than expected. At 13, Damien's daughter from his first marriage had reached that fragile age when children begin seeing more than adults realize, but still do not understand, what the things they see actually mean. Natalie had helped raise her for nearly a decade. She knew the girl's moods, her favorite soup, the way she bit the inside of her cheek when nervous. Lily dropped her backpack near the stairs and stopped when she saw Natalie sitting at the kitchen island. "Are you sick?" she asked. Natalie forced a small smile. "No, sweetheart. Just tired." Lily nodded, then opened the refrigerator and stood there too long, as if she had come in looking for something other than food. Finally, she turned back. Is Sienna mad at you?" The question was so unexpected Natalie almost answered too quickly. "Why would you ask that?" Lily shrugged, but it was the careless shrug of someone trying too hard to seem casual. "I just heard her talking to Dad the other day. She said if things stayed delayed much longer, she'd have to keep her dresses in garment bags." Natalie went completely still. "What dresses?" Lily frowned. "The ones she said she was moving into your closet. I thought maybe it was for some charity thing or one of those fashion events." She paused. "Was I not supposed to say that?" The room seemed to narrow around Natalie, not because a child had revealed the affair. Natalie already knew that. What shattered her all over again was the detail, the confidence, the casual way Sienna had spoken about moving her clothes into Natalie's closet, inside Natalie's home, while Natalie was still living there, as if her removal were not a question, but a scheduling issue. Natalie reached for Lily's hand before the girl could pull away. "No," she said softly, swallowing the ache in her throat. "You did nothing wrong." But upstairs, a floorboard creaked, and for the first time, Natalie wondered how many conversations in this house had happened as if she were already gone. By the end of the week, Natalie realized Damien was not rushing because he did not need to. He had already started building the version of the story he wanted other people to believe. It began in the softest way possible. A missed call from a woman on the gala committee. A strange pause from one of Natalie's long-term clients. A text from an acquaintance asking, "Are you taking some time off?" None of it sounded direct enough to confront. That was what made it so effective. It was smoke without visible fire, concern without accusation, pity without proof. Natalie knew that kind of social damage. In Manhattan circles, reputations rarely exploded. They thinned out quietly, like fabric worn down at the seams. That Friday morning, she sat in a cafe just off Madison Avenue, with her laptop open and a coffee she had barely touched. An email from a client glowed on the screen. "Given everything on your plate, perhaps we should postpone your leadership role on the December account. Everything on your plate." The words were polite, but they landed like a slap. Natalie read the message 3 times before closing the laptop. She had told no one beyond Elise and Gabriel what happened in the house. She had not missed deadlines. She had not broken down publicly. Yet somehow, a version of her was already moving through other people's minds. Fragile, distracted, no longer steady enough to trust with important things. That evening, Gabriel reviewed the email in silence. "He's doing it indirectly," he said. "Which means he's done this before in some form. He knows the safest smear is the one nobody can quote." Natalie sat across from him, arms folded tightly. Can he really do that? Just imply things until people fill in the blanks? Gabriel met her eyes. "He doesn't need them to believe you're unstable. He only needs them to worry you might be." The precision of it made her skin crawl. Then came the second blow. Elise called just after 9 with a clipped voice Natalie had learned to fear. "I pulled metadata from some forwarded messages," she said. "Sienna's been talking to 2 women in your donor circle for weeks. Nothing explicit, just planting concern. Saying you've been exhausted, emotional, maybe not fully yourself since your father passed." Natalie closed her eyes. There it was. Not scandal, not cruelty. Something cleaner, more believable, more deadly. They were not trying to destroy her in one strike. They were softening the ground beneath her feet until, when she finally fell, everyone would think she had simply lost her balance on her own. Elise did not call Natalie that night, or she came in person. When Natalie opened the door, Elise was holding a slim folder and her silver laptop, her face set in the hard, unreadable way it always was, when numbers had finally stopped looking suspicious and started becoming proof. She stepped inside without small talk, set everything on the dining table and said, "I found the apartment." Natalie's throat tightened. "What apartment?" Elise opened the folder and slid over a printout. A luxury lease in Tribeca. 2 bedrooms, high floor, river view, private terrace. The monthly payment alone was enough to make most people stare twice. But it was not Damien's name on the primary paperwork. It was an LLC Natalie had never heard of, one that had received a string of transfers from a consulting account linked to Damien's business structure. At first, Natalie only looked at the address, then at the furnishing invoices, then at the move-in date. Her fingers went cold. The lease had been activated 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks. That meant while Damien was still sleeping in their bed, while Sienna was sitting at Natalie's kitchen island, pretending to comfort her, they had already secured a place to begin their new life. Not someday. Not if the marriage ended. They had built a landing place before Natalie even knew she was being pushed. "There's more," Elise said. She turned the laptop around. On the screen were furniture orders, delivery confirmations, and decor notes attached to the apartment account. A cream sectional, custom drapes, a marble dining table, monogrammed bath linens. Someone had been planning not just an escape, but an arrival. Natalie stared at one item and felt the room tilt. A walk-in closet system expansion. Sienna. Of course. Not because Natalie could prove the item was hers, but because she remembered the way Sienna had stood in the doorway of the master bedroom months ago, looking at Natalie's dresses with that unreadable little smile. At the time, it had seemed harmless. Now it felt like rehearsal. "You think this was for both of them?" Natalie said quietly. Elise gave her a level look. "I think they were preparing a house before they were finished dismantling yours." Natalie lowered herself into a chair. For a moment she could not speak. The affair had been devastating. The lies had been humiliating. But this was different. This was architecture, timing, logistics, a future measured, funded, and decorated while she was still inside the old one. And when Elise slid the final page across the table, Natalie realized the apartment was not the worst part. It was who had guaranteed the lease. Gabriel arrived 20 minutes after Elise's message and read the lease guarantee in complete silence. Then he set the paper down and looked at Natalie with an expression she had never seen from him before. Not sympathy, not anger, something colder. The look of a man realizing the people across the table were even more calculating than he had first assumed. "The guarantor isn't Damien," Natalie said, her voice thin. "It's Sienna." Elise nodded once. "And that matters." At first, Natalie did not understand why. If anything, it only deepened the humiliation. Sienna had not simply followed Damien into betrayal. She had invested in it, signed for it, anchored herself to the future they were building behind Natalie's back. But Gabriel reached for the second file Elise had brought and opened it to a chain of recovered emails. "These were pulled from an archived sync folder linked to Damien's assistant," Elise said. "He deleted them from one account, but not from the mirrored storage." Natalie bent forward. The first message was dated 9 months earlier. From Sienna Vale to Damien Rowan. "You can't keep waiting for her to recover. If you don't create movement, she'll stay in that house forever out of habit." Natalie stopped breathing for a second. Gabriel turned the page. Another email, 3 weeks later. "She still trusts me. I can keep her calm. But you need to stop backing out every time she looks fragile. Now, you said yourself she signs whatever you put in front of her when she's overwhelmed." Natalie pressed a hand to her mouth. There it was. Not temptation. Not weakness. Not two lonely people making selfish mistakes. Planning. Measured, patient, strategic planning. By the third email, Natalie could no longer pretend she was reading about an affair. She was reading about herself, as if she were an obstacle in a renovation project. Sienna advised Damien on timing, on emotional pressure, on when Natalie was most exhausted, on how to make each shift feel small enough that she would question herself instead of them. And then came the line that split the room open. "Once the closet is cleared and the legal side is clean, everything else will feel natural." Natalie stared at the sentence until the words blurred. The closet, Lily's innocent comment, the master bedroom doorway, the garment bags, every detail snapped into place with horrifying precision. Sienna had not just fallen into Natalie's life. She had been studying how to step into it. Gabriel closed the file carefully. "This changes our position," he said. Natalie lifted her head, her grief hardening into something sharper. Because for the first time since the bathroom door opened, she was no longer looking at betrayal and asking why. She was looking at conspiracy and finally understanding how far she might be willing to go to answer it. The next morning, Gabriel asked Natalie a question no one had asked her since this nightmare began. "When you renovated the townhouse," he said, "and who actually paid for it?" Natalie blinked at him across Elise's dining table, still exhausted from the emails, the lease, the quiet horror of seeing her life discussed like a logistical inconvenience. "We both did," she said automatically. Then she stopped. At least, that's what I always believed. Gabriel did not interrupt. Natalie looked down at her hands and forced herself to go back. 5 years earlier, the townhouse had needed major work, new plumbing, structural reinforcement, custom built-ins, a complete kitchen redesign. Damien had handled the contractors and permits because, at the time, Natalie was traveling constantly for work. She had contributed what she thought was her share by transferring money from an account her father had created for her years before, an old family reserve meant for long-term security, so not vanity. "I wired a large amount from my father's trust," she said slowly. "Not directly to the contractor, to Damien. He said it would be cleaner if he managed the renovation through one account." Elise and Gabriel exchanged a look. Not a dramatic one, just the kind professionals shared when a missing piece had finally landed where they feared it would. "How much?" Elise asked. Natalie named the figure. Elise sat back. "That's not decorative money. That materially changed the value of the house." A chill moved through Natalie's chest. Gabriel leaned forward. "Do you still have the trust disbursement records?" "I should. My father's attorney sent copies at the time." "Good," Gabriel said, "because if those funds improved the property in a measurable way, and then Damien's version of ownership becomes a lot less clean." For the first time in days, Natalie felt something close to oxygen return to the room. Not victory. Not yet. But ground. Real ground beneath her feet. Elise opened another spreadsheet and began tracing timelines. Trust disbursement, renovation milestones, property valuation jumps, equity shifts. The numbers formed a new picture, and it was nothing like the helpless future Damien had tried to hand Natalie across the kitchen counter with his white roses and talk of dignity. He had counted on her grief, her exhaustion, her decency. What he had not counted on was documentation. Natalie stared at the townhouse address on the screen, suddenly seeing it for what it really was. Not just the place where she had been betrayed, but the place partly built on money that came from her side of the family. And if that money could be traced, then Damien had not merely tried to replace her. He had tried to evict her from something she had already paid to build. By the second week, Damien made the mistake Gabriel had been waiting for. He got comfortable. Men like Damien did not unravel because they felt guilty. They unraveled because they mistook silence for surrender. Natalie had said little, signed nothing, and stopped asking emotional questions. She moved through the house with controlled stillness, speaking only when necessary, letting him believe the shock had hollowed her out. To Damien, that looked like defeat. So he became careless. The first sign came when Lily mentioned a gala at the Plaza Hotel. Damien was hosting a major charity event through the Rowan Family Foundation, a glossy new project he had been talking about for months. Publicly, it was being framed as a meaningful effort to support grief counseling and family wellness. Privately, Gabriel already suspected the foundation was something else entirely. A polished screen behind which Damien could rebuild his image as a compassionate, stable man after a quiet divorce. Then the invitation arrived. Heavy cream cardstock, gold lettering, black tie attire. Damien Rowan, founder and host. Natalie held it in both hands and felt a strange chill move through her. This was not just an event. It was a stage. A room full of donors, board members, media contacts, and carefully selected witnesses. If Damien could stand beneath crystal chandeliers and speak about healing, the loyalty and resilience, then the story would begin writing itself around him. The noble husband, the burdened public figure, the woman at home who simply could not keep up. "He's launching the new version of himself," Gabriel said when she showed him the invitation. Elise looked up from her laptop, and probably laundering more than reputation through that foundation. By now, they had traced enough timing overlaps to be deeply suspicious. The trust paperwork, the townhouse equity issue, the Tribeca lease, The hidden transfers, Sienna's emails. None of it proved criminal conduct on its own, but taken together, it showed design. The gala could be where all those moving pieces finally connected. Natalie sat very still. What if I let him think he's won? She asked. Gabriel's eyes lifted to hers. He did not smile, but something sharpened in his expression. That, he said, is exactly what we need him to believe. So the plan changed. Natalie would not resist publicly. She would not threaten him. She would not expose the affair yet. Instead, she would become quieter, softer, easier to manage. She would make Damien feel safe enough to keep performing. And the more confidently he stepped into the spotlight at the plaza, the less prepared he would be for what was waiting there in the dark, just beyond the reach of his own applause. For the next several days, Natalie did exactly what Gabriel told her to do. She became easier. Not warm, not forgiving, just quieter in a way Damien could mistake for collapse. She stopped asking where he was going. She stopped reacting when he took calls on the terrace. She even let him find her once at the kitchen island, staring blankly at a cup of coffee gone cold, as if the strength had drained out of her all at once. Damien watched her carefully, and Natalie could almost feel his relief. This was the version of her he had counted on, the wounded woman too exhausted to fight, too ashamed to speak, too unsteady to organize a response. Once he believed that, his whole body changed. He moved through the house with less tension. He started humming under his breath again. Twice, Natalie saw him smiling at his phone. Sienna must have sensed it too. 3 days before the gala, Natalie came downstairs early and found a garment bag hanging near the foyer. It was cream-colored, expensive, new. There was no note attached, but she did not need one. She knew that kind of silent claiming now. Sienna was preparing for the plaza as though the night were already hers. Natalie simply walked past it. That evening, Damien tried one more time to sound merciful. "I've spoken to someone about a temporary apartment for you," he said from the doorway of the study, not even bothering to hide the administrative tone in his voice. "Just until things settle." Natalie looked up slowly from the book open in her lap. "For me?" He nodded. "It would be more peaceful. For everyone." For everyone. The phrase almost made her smile. Instead, she lowered her eyes and let her shoulders sink the slightest bit, enough to suggest defeat. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. Damien exhaled, and in that tiny release, Natalie heard everything. Victory. He stepped farther into the room, gentler now, as though kindness cost him nothing when he believed the outcome was secure. "I know this is painful, but dragging things out won't help you." Help you. Natalie pressed her thumb between the pages of the book to keep her hand from shaking. He still thought this was about managing her emotions. He still believed she knew only enough to be hurt, not enough to be dangerous. After he left, Gabriel called. "Did he offer you the apartment?" he asked. "Yes." "Good," Gabriel said. "That means he's moving on schedule." Natalie stood and crossed to the window. Manhattan glittered below, beautiful and cold. "And if he's moving on schedule," Gabriel added, "then at the plaza, he'll walk straight into the life he thinks is waiting for him." The ballroom at the plaza glowed like money pretending to be virtue, when crystal chandeliers burned overhead. Waiters moved between tables with silver trays and practiced smiles. Women in satin gowns leaned close over champagne flutes, and men with polished shoes and careful opinions spoke in low voices about philanthropy, legacy, and year-end giving. At the center of it all stood Damien Rowan, steady and elegant in a black tuxedo, receiving admiration as if he had earned every piece of it. Natalie watched from the back of the room. She had arrived alone. Her dress was deep midnight blue, simple and severe, with no sparkle beyond the small diamond studs her mother once wore. Gabriel had told her not to dress for revenge. Dress for authority, he said. So she did. Her hair was swept back. Her face was calm. She did not look like a wife coming to confront humiliation. No, she looked like a woman who knew something the room did not. On the stage, Damien smiled as the foundation video ended behind him. Images of grieving families, soft piano music, children drawing in sunlit therapy rooms, words like healing and hope projected in tasteful gold lettering. The audience responded exactly as he had expected. Warm applause, nods, sympathy, trust. Then Damien stepped to the microphone. "Tonight," he said, voice rich and measured, "we celebrate resilience. We honor the families who hold themselves together through hardship. We believe that integrity begins at home." Natalie almost laughed. Instead, she glanced toward the side entrance. Gabriel stood there, still as stone. Elise was near the rear aisle with a slim black folder held against her side. Everything was in place. Damien continued, speaking about duty, compassion, the responsibility of those with means to protect the vulnerable. Sienna sat 3 tables from the stage in a pale gown, poised and glowing, already carrying herself like the next woman of the Rowan name. Every now and then she smiled up at him with a softness so practiced it made Natalie's stomach turn. Then Damien said the one sentence he should never have said. "In every part of my life, I have tried to lead with honesty." Natalie moved before she could think twice. One step, then another. The sound of her heels against the ballroom floor was quiet, but something about the timing made people turn. A few heads first, then more. Conversations thinned, glasses lowered, the air shifted. By the time Damien noticed her walking toward the stage, it was too late to stop her without revealing fear. And for the first time all night, his smile disappeared. Damien recovered quickly. Too quickly. He looked down at Natalie from the stage with the composed concern of a man prepared to turn any interruption into proof of someone else's instability. A few guests shifted in their seats. Others glanced toward Sienna, then back to Natalie, sensing scandal, but not yet understanding its shape. "Natalie," Damien said into the microphone, his tone low and soothing. "This isn't the right place." That was exactly what he wanted everyone to hear. Not fear, not guilt. Patience. Natalie stopped at the foot of the stage and lifted her chin. "You're right," she said clearly. "A room built on lies is never the right place for truth. But tonight will have to do." The ballroom went still. Gabriel stepped forward from the side aisle, calm and deliberate, while Elise moved toward the front with the black folder in her hand. Damien's eyes flickered for the first time. Not panic, yet. Just disruption. The first crack in a man who had counted too heavily on performance. Natalie did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You invited this room to celebrate integrity," she said. "So let's begin with the fact that while you were building this foundation, you were also building a private residence in Tribeca with my best friend behind my back." A ripple moved through the crowd. Sienna's face drained of color. Damien stepped away from the microphone. "This is a personal matter." "No," Gabriel said, his voice carrying cleanly across the room. "It became a legal matter when private transfers, concealed entities, and marital asset manipulation entered the picture." Now the room changed, not because of emotion, because of language people like them understood. Elise opened the folder and handed copies to 2 board members seated near the front. Lease records, transfer summaries, timeline charts, a guarantee bearing Sienna's signature, documentation showing foundation-linked funds overlapping with accounts already under scrutiny. No shouting, no theatrics, just paper. Damien tried one last time. These documents are being misrepresented. Natalie turned to face the audience, not him. For months, she said, I was being quietly replaced in my own home, while my grief, my trust, and my family money were used to make it easier. The silence that followed felt bigger than applause. Then one of the investors rose from his chair. Another board member closed the folder with visible disgust. Sienna stood abruptly, but no one moved to follow her. And as Damien looked around the ballroom, finally seeing belief leave the room one face at a time, Natalie understood something deep and irreversible. He was not losing because she had exposed his affair. He was losing because at last his image had met evidence. By midnight, Damien Rowan was no longer the most admired man in the ballroom. He was the loneliest. The collapse did not happen with shouting. It happened the way real power leaves a person. Quietly, publicly, and all at once. Conversation stopped when he approached. Board members, who had been smiling at him an hour earlier, now stood in tight circles with legal counsel. One investor left before dessert. Another handed his assistant a card and told him to cancel Monday's follow-up immediately. Damien kept trying to regain control. Natalie watched him move from one cluster of guests to another, speaking in low, urgent tones, his face arranged in that same polished calm. But the room had changed. He was no longer explaining a misunderstanding. He was explaining documents, timelines, money, signatures. Facts had weight, and for the first time in a very long time, charm was not enough to lift them. Then Sienna made her choice. She had disappeared for nearly 20 minutes after Natalie spoke, but when she returned, she was no longer trying to stand near Damien. She came down the side corridor, with her wrap clutched tightly over her shoulders, eyes bright with the cold panic of someone who had just realized she had tied herself to a sinking name. Damien turned when he saw her. "Sienna, wait!" She did, but only long enough to destroy him one last time. "You said none of this could be traced," she whispered, too sharply, too loudly, in a room already straining to hear every fracture. "You told me she'd be gone before any of this mattered. 3 people turned at once, then 5. Damien's face changed, not into guilt, into fury. For the first time, Natalie saw the man underneath the careful manners. The one who had always believed control was the same thing as character. He reached for Sienna's arm, not violently, but with the desperate grip of a man trying to hold on to the last witness still willing to stand near him. Sienna pulled away. "I'm not going down for you," she said, and this time everyone heard it. That was the moment it ended. Not when Natalie exposed the affair, not even when the board saw the paperwork. It ended when the woman Damien had chosen over his wife abandoned him in the exact language of self-preservation he had once used on Natalie. By the time security quietly escorted him into a private side room to speak with Foundation counsel, his phone was already lighting up with messages he could not control. Withdrawn support, postponed meetings, urgent review. And across the ballroom, Natalie stood very still, realizing the cruelest part of justice was also the cleanest. Damien had not been ruined by her rage. He had been ruined by his own design finally turning back on him. 3 months later, winter light poured softly through the windows of Natalie's new apartment overlooking the Hudson. It was not as large as the townhouse. It did not have the grand staircase, the formal dining room, or the polished image of the life she had once worked so hard to protect. But for the first time in years, every inch of the space felt honest. The quiet belonged to her. The furniture had been chosen by her. The air no longer carried secrets. And that peace had been earned. After the gala, the fallout moved faster than Damien ever imagined. The Foundation board removed him pending full review. Investors pulled back. The Tribeca lease became part of a broader legal unraveling. The townhouse valuation, once something Damien had tried to use against Natalie, turned in her favor when the traced trust funds from her father's estate proved how much of the home's value had come from her side. In the final settlement, she received a substantial financial award, full public protection of her name, and a written correction from the foundation's counsel, making clear she had no involvement in the misconduct under review. Sienna got exactly what her choices deserved. The women who once welcomed her into private lunches and charity circles stopped calling. The social invitations dried up. She had tried to step into another woman's life, only to discover that stolen places never stay warm for long. But Natalie's real reward was not money. It was restoration. Lily, after weeks of confusion and tears, I came to Natalie one Sunday afternoon, carrying a small box of photographs she had saved from the old house. "I didn't want him to throw these away," she said. Natalie cried then, not from pain, but from relief. The child she had loved and protected had seen the truth at last, and love had survived where deception had not. Work changed, too. One of the women on the gala board, impressed by Natalie's composure under public humiliation, introduced her to a boutique hospitality group looking for a new senior partner in client strategy. This time, Natalie said yes, without shrinking. And Gabrielle? He did not rush her healing. He waited until spring, until the sharpest part of the storm had passed. Then one evening, walking beside her near the river, he took her hand and asked no dramatic question at all. "Oh, would you like a future that feels safe this time?" Natalie smiled through tears and nodded, because in the end, she did not get her old life back. She got something better, a name cleared, a heart protected, a love earned, and the deep, private satisfaction of knowing that the people who tried to erase her had only forced her into the life she was truly meant to claim. And so, dear friends, this story comes to an end. If you are still here with me at this moment, then maybe something in Natalie's journey has touched your heart in a very personal way. Maybe it reminded you of a wound you once carried quietly. Maybe it brought back a season when you gave too much, trusted too deeply, or had to rebuild yourself after betrayal. And maybe that is the real reason stories like this stay with us. They remind us that pain can break us, but it can also wake us up. The Stoics believed that we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can choose who we become through it. Marcus Aurelius taught that the obstacle can become the way. Epictetus reminded us that our strength begins when we stop letting other people's actions define our worth. That is why Natalie's victory feels so powerful. She did not heal by becoming cruel. She healed by becoming clear, calm, and unshakably honest with herself. That is a lesson we can all carry into real life. If this story stayed with you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what part of Natalie's journey felt most true to your own heart?